Welcome to the second of this year's Newnan Coweta Chamber of Commerce Forums for candidates appearing on the May 22nd ballot in either nonpartisan or partisan primary elections here in Coweta County. This forum is brought to you by the Newnan Coweta Chamber of Commerce Voice of Business Committee, and it's brought to you from the studios here at the Central Educational Center, CEC, in Newnan. I'm Dean Jackson. I'm joined by a couple of other members of the Voice of Business Committee for tonight's forums. And we have several tonight partisan primary races that we're going to bring to you and introduce the candidates. We've had several partisan primaries and nonpartisan races in general on the May 22nd ballot. Chamber heard from candidates in the Coweta County Commission District 2 races and 4 Coweta County Board of Education races on April 23rd. April 24th tonight, we're going to hear from candidates in the Republican primary for Georgia House District 71 and 72 and the U.S. Congressional District 3 seats. We're going to have 2 partisan primaries, one in the Democratic primary, one in the Republican primary, all for the seat currently held by Drew Ferguson. The Chamber's forums are intended to give you, Coweta County citizens, an idea of where these candidates stand as we head toward that May 22nd ballot. Thanks to our audience for being here tonight. We greatly appreciate you coming, and we greatly appreciate your attention to these issues that we're going to bring to you tonight. We also want to thank the Newnan County Chamber of Commerce and the Voice of Business Committee and Chamber staff for organizing these forums and putting everything on. And of course, we want to especially thank Michael Britt from the Central Educational Center and the students in his video production class who have prepared our setting tonight, who are video taping this for us, and of course have put on this marvelous setting that we can hold these forums. Thank you very much to them. And finally, we'd like to thank our candidates for office who have come here tonight and will share their views with us, and also to all of them for standing up and running for public office here in Coweta County and around the region. Our format for these forums will be similar to Chamber of Commerce forums held each election year. Each candidate will be allowed a 2-minute opening and closing statement, and then our candidates will have up to 1 minute or so to respond to a series of questions. After the final candidate gives his or her answer to a question, a 30-second rebuttal will be allowed if the candidates elect. One final note. Newnan Coweta Chamber of Commerce is a nonpartisan organization and does not endorse candidates for office. Questions have been submitted by Chamber members and apply equally to all candidates. We ask that our guests at tonight's forum also respect that neutrality, please, and the dignity of this occasion in general. By refraining from any demonstration for or against any candidate, we ask that you hold your applause or any show of support or opposition during our forum, even for issues that you feel very strongly about. Our occasion tonight is meant to give these candidates a chance to speak for themselves as they seek election to these posts. We appreciate our audience respect for that opportunity to do so uninterrupted. And with that, we'll start our forums. We're going to start tonight's forums with Georgia House of Representative District 71 primary, the Republican primary, between David Stovers and Sam Anders. We're going to have Marvin McCoy right to my left, who's going to serve as timekeeper during this. We're going to begin with Sam Anders in just a few moments, who faces incumbent Representative David Stover in this year's May 22nd primary. Mr. Stover declined to participate in this forum. Again, I'm Dean Jackson, and I'll serve as moderator during this segment. Mr. Anders, I believe this is right, the winner of your primary race on May 22nd will face Democrat Tom Thomason in November. So thank you for coming tonight. We appreciate your participation. So we'll start with a 2-minute opening statement, if you would. Tell us a little bit about yourself, personally and professionally. Tell us why you're seeking election.
Okay. Well, as it says, I'm running for House District 71 here in the great state of Georgia. Obviously, my name is Sam Anders as well. To give you a bit of experience of myself, I currently work for a company called Sinclair Systems International. It's not hard to forget, we make all the labels that go on your fruit and veg. So you'll see those in the grocery store. I'm the East Coast Service Supervisor. Currently my area is 28 states up and down the East Coast. Not only do we supply the labels, but we also supply the machinery. And so I control all the service engineers that go up and down the East Coast, and I'm based out of Peachtree City. On the military side of the house, I am currently a 19-year in the United States Air Force Reserve. I'm an E-7 Master Sergeant. I've been married to my wife, Catherine, for the last 15 years. 11 of those we have spent in Coweta County. We have three beautiful girls. Lily's 15, Hollis is 12, and Madeline is 10. And they all attend the great schools here in Coweta County. I'm just really proud that you guys invited me to come up here this evening, and I look forward to the discussion.
Very good. Well, thank you very much. If you don't mind, let me ask you a few questions, kind of get your ideas on where you stand on some of the issues facing Georgians today in Coweta County. One is I'm going to ask you to start off just to kind of elaborate a little bit, in a sense, on your opening statement, and specifically, anytime people seek these offices, there's regular people that seek these offices. They have families and jobs and all sorts of other obligations, civic and religious and what have you. So, of course, the job you seek can take a great deal of your time.
Yes, sir.
And I'd just like to ask you in general, in seeking this position, if elected, are you prepared to fulfill all duties, official and ceremonial, of
Yes,
this
sir,
office?
I certainly am, without a doubt.
All right. Thank you, sir. So let's start talking a little bit about state budget in this case.
Yes, sir.
State revenues up significantly this year. Governor Deal signed, I believe it was a $25 billion state budget into law for the 2018 fiscal year. $1.26 billion increase, if I understand that correctly, in total state spending from last year. Same time, the General Assembly dropped state income tax rates as well, doubled the standard deduction. Oh, and this is, I know I'm kind of pushing together two issues, so I'm going to give you up to 2 minutes, if you will, to sort of take this on if you like. Overall, what do you think the priorities should be for our state tax system and budgeting in the coming years?
I think everybody could agree that reducing our taxes, the taxes that we pay, would always be a good thing. But I think that we offset that with generating more revenue for the state of Georgia, and I think we need to really look at how our government spends our money. So at the end of the day, we all pay taxes. My biggest concern is how are we spending it, okay? I know there's a lot of people that don't like to pay taxes, but again, my focus has always been how are we spending the money? Are these common sense approaches? Are these things that we really, really need to do? When I balance my budget every year, those are the same questions I have to ask myself. Are we spending money in the right areas? And if the answer is yes, then we need to continue to spend it. If the answer is, however, no, then obviously we need to find a way to reduce that.
Very good. As a part of their budget passed this year, the Georgia General Assembly removed austerity cuts to schools, fully funded QBE, I understand for the first time in quite some time. What do you see as Georgia's most pressing K through 12 educational issues in general?
I think just on a big whole in the state of Georgia. So from Coweta County, from our standpoint, I think we have some wonderful schools. We have some great teachers. As always, I've always said there's three people that you really need to pay when it comes down to things. You need to pay your military because they protect the country at large. You need to pay your law enforcement because they protect you here at the house. And we need to make sure that we pay our educators, right? Because they're educating our children. It's the next generation that's coming up. So as always, we need to focus on where our money is going into our schools. And again, what are we spending our money in? At the school level, is it common sense approach to getting these things? Does that kind of answer your question?
I think it does.
Okay, sir.
Those would be particularly your priorities in looking at that.
Yes, sir. I think it always comes back to, at the end of the day, you always have to prioritize how you're spending. The money's coming in, and while we always want to generate more money, if the money's coming in, we just need to make sure that we're spending it in the right areas.
Very good. Georgia General Assembly approved this year HB 930, I think this is correct, the transit expansion bill. It allows 13 metro Atlanta counties to impose sales taxes of up to 1% for mass transit, creates a regional board to oversee transit funding and construction. Wanted to mention that one issue because it was obviously a very big issue this year. My question is, how might that specific move affect Coweta County in the coming years? And what do you think the next steps in general are for tackling Georgia's transportation and infrastructure issues?
Okay, so obviously we want Georgia to grow, right? We want to bring more business in. We want to make sure that we have the trained individuals to fill those job positions. But we also need to be careful about how we grow. We need to, again, make common sense decisions on how we're growing, all right? One of the big reasons I love Coweta County is it is a small town feel, and yet we have all the big city amenities, all right? And that's the best thing about Coweta County. So, and especially my district in particular. So while I feel like we need to increase the infrastructure, the transportation system, we just need to make sure that we're doing it in the right areas, again, as always. And then we don't want to be putting individuals out. You know, nobody likes to sit in traffic forever and a day. So again, we need to be making sure that we spend the money wisely when we hire contractors, and we need to make sure that they finish the job that we've asked them to do in a reasonable amount of time.
All right. I'm going to ask a couple of questions about the healthcare industry. I think the specific one I'd like to ask you about here is of a great deal of interest locally, and that's of the certificate of need process. That's particularly of interest locally because it's block development of a proposed behavioral hospital in Newnan. I think that's the view of many people. Do you see a need to revisit Georgia's certificate of need process, and how might that come about?
I think we always need to, it's always a process of improvement, right? So we always really need to look at what do we currently have on the table, what do we currently have on the books, is it working, is it accomplishing what we need it to? If so, then we need to continue down that path. If not, what can we do to change it and improve it? So on a larger scale, again, we need to kind of look at how we're doing things. I think that's always the way it comes back to, and making common sense decisions about it.
And also, just another question about healthcare. What, in your view, is the best way to combat Georgia's opioid epidemic, or the opioid epidemic in Georgia? And what are some of the other healthcare priorities you think we might need to have as a state?
Wow, so that's a really big, encompassing, big question right there, right? So it is a problem here in the state of Georgia. I've seen lots of different things on how we can combat that. I think we need to attack it from several different areas. We need to provide counseling for those that are already in that bad situation. We need to create a situation where we can teach prevention. We also need to support our law enforcement, so when they go out there, and they need to be able to do their job in removing that from the streets. So I mean, it's a pretty big encompassing idea. Does that answer your question, or would you like it more specific?
No, I think so.
Okay,
I think that's
sir.
fine. I think the very last question I'll ask you before we move on to a closing statement is, as you go around your district and campaigning, what are you hearing from Cowetans? Do they most want you to sort of tackle, or whoever goes to the State House to tackle? Right.
So I think there's one of the big things that I'm hearing from people right now is representation. You know, not to bash anybody, if we look at the 2017 record, and I know David Stover's not here, but he was absent for 30% of the votes. So 30%, being absent 30% of the time is not just a vote of no. I mean, it's basically, we're missing opportunities to get things done. So if you're not there to partake, you're not there to participate, you're not there to do what the people ask you, then that's probably one of the big reasons I'm running too. So good representation, I think that's what everybody wants at the end of the day. And it's across the board on many different matters, and that's one of the big reasons why I'm running.
Okay. Well, thank you, Mr. Anders. I'll give you up to a 2-minute closing statement. There may be any number of issues we haven't had a chance to talk about tonight. Please bring those up if there are, but otherwise, closing statement.
So I think at the end of the day, when you look at me and what I want to do, there's lots of things that I think that I bring to the table. Okay, so I'm a manager at work. I know how to manage people. I also work in the military. I was an acting first sergeant for a very long time, and we always need to come together. So whether you're on one side or the other, I think eventually at the end of the day you kind of need to come together for what's best for the people. Representation's always been the best thing. It's always been a point at my heart. So my military experience is an extension of that. We have 3 core values in the Air Force. It's integrity first, service before self, and excellence in everything I do, right? So integrity means doing the right thing when nobody's looking. So as a representative, you need to be able to do the right thing for your constituents because they don't have the time. Everybody's caught up in their businesses or in their families. They don't have the time to constantly be watching you, so you need to have integrity. Service before self. It sounds pretty self-explanatory, but I mean showing up to vote, right? It's better to show up and vote and then people be happy or unhappy with you. But if you don't show up to vote, then there's no voice. And excellence in all we do. I think that's at the core of everything you always want to do. And I always say to my children at the end of the day, you need to try your best. You need to get out there and do everything as best as you possibly can. And it doesn't matter, you know, if regardless of the career path that you choose, just be the best in that career path. And that's what I really want to take to the Capitol is those 3 core values. I think those are going to be really good, and I think that will serve Georgians well.
All right. Sam Anders, thank you very much. Good luck
you.
in your race for House District 71. Appreciate it.
Sir.
We're going to take a break for just a moment. We'll be right back with Republican primary candidates for Georgia House 72. We're back, and we're now going to begin this evening's forum for candidates running in the Republican partisan primary for the Georgia House 72 district seat. Welcome to Josh Bonner, incumbent in that seat, and candidate Mary Kay Bcast, who face each other on the May 22nd ballot. Thank you all very much for being here, and again, thank you all both for running. I'd like to remind both of our candidates to watch for signals from our timekeeper and confine your responses to the allotted time. And we're going to start with opening statements in just a moment, 2 minutes each. If you would, we'll start with Mr. Bonner. Your 2-minute opening statement, please.
Thank you, Dean, and thank you to the Chamber for hosting this forum. My name is Josh Bonner. I am currently the Georgia House of Representatives for District 72, which covers Peachtree City, Brooks, Sonoy, and City of Haralson. I'm in my first term, just finished up my second legislative session. I grew up in Fayette County, product of Fayette County Public Schools. Went off to the University of Georgia. From there, joined the Army, spent 4.5 years on active duty, and then transitioned back to Georgia into the Army Reserves and into the family real estate business. Came back to Georgia because this is the place that I wanted to raise my family. We moved back to Fayette County, where I began to own and operate our family real estate business and continue my service in the reserves. Since 2001, when I got out of active duty, been called up a few times to serve in the global war on terrorism, most recently back in 2010, 2011 in Iraq. Married to my wife, Michelle, for the past 20 years, and in Fayette County we raise our 4 children. My oldest is 18 and my youngest is 3, so we have a great time at the house. I've got one in the driver's seat and one in the car seat, which makes it fun. But it's been my honor to serve in this seat for the last 2 years, and I look forward to your continued support. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Bcast, your opening statement. Tell us a little bit about yourself personally and professionally while you're seeking office.
Okay, I'm so happy to be here. Last year at this time, I was actually teaching night classes here at the CEC for people who are going to be teachers. I teach math and science education courses. So the reason why I'm here running for House District 72 is because over the last approximately 8 years, so many bad education laws have been passed. And so the only way I found out about that was I got elected to the Fayette County School Board. So once elected, I tried to have better standards and have the kids learn at their highest possible potential. And I realized that I couldn't do that on the Fayette County School Board because of the laws. So this legislative session, there were 4 really bad education laws that passed. And so I believe that we need to be #1 for business, which we're doing great with that. But imagine if we combine #1 for business with #1 for education, we would be unstoppable.
Thank you, ma'am. We appreciate that. We're going to go to a series of questions now. We'll start with you, please, Ms. Bcast, for our first one in just a moment. 1-minute responses to these. Please elaborate a little bit on what you'd bring to the office that you're seeking. Particularly, I wanted to ask you, since these positions obviously take a great deal of time, if elected to this office, are you prepared to fulfill all duties, official and ceremonial?
Definitely. When I served on the Fayette County School Board, I did not miss a single meeting, and I'm prepared to be there every single day. Not only just be there, but read every single bill, because I'm already reading every single bill when it comes to education, and I'm ready to read the other bills as well.
Very good. Same question to you, Mr. Bonner.
To answer your question is yes, and what I bring to the table, I believe, my background and experience, not only as a 20-year veteran as a military intelligence officer, but also as a small business owner and an active member of our community ever since I was a small child growing up in Fayette County and being involved in the community. I was raised to give back in service, and so that's what I've served on the school board of my kids' private Christian school for a period of time, and have been very active both in the chamber in Fayette as well as Coweta, as well as through our church where we currently serve in the youth ministry.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Ms. Pacquiao, would you have a rebuttal or anything to add? 30 seconds.
Okay, yes. I am really thankful that I have the opportunity to run, because when you look at the laws that have been passed, and it's not just in education, it's in other things as well, we need someone who has the background to be able to read the laws, understand what they mean, and then vote the right way.
Very good. Rebuttal, Mr. Bonner?
No rebuttal.
All right. We'll move on to our next question. We'll start with you, Mr. Bonner. This is, again, a little bit of a long one because it is about economics in the state right now, or specifically state taxes and budget. So we'll allow up to a 2-minute answer on this. State revenues, of course, up significantly this year. Governor Deal signed a $25 billion state budget. And of course, y'all correct me on any of this if I'm incorrect. For the upcoming fiscal year, an increase of $1.26 billion in total state spending from last year. Same time, General Assembly dropped state income tax rate over the next 2 years and doubled the standard deduction. Just say that as a setting. Overall, what should the priorities be for our state tax system and the budget in general as we look over, say, the next 2 or 3 years? Mr. Bonner.
Sure. Well, when it comes to taxpayers' money, I believe that the taxpayers themselves know best how to spend their money. So the less money that we send to the government, I think, better. Now, that money that is sent, and we should be very mindful of how much money the government does get, but we ought to prioritize that in a way that achieves our goals. Now, I will say since 2007, 2008, the state of Georgia has done a fairly good job at turning themselves around, putting money in the rainy day fund, becoming more physically sound so that we can provide the services that government ought to do. At the same time, this past session, as you mentioned, we're able to reduce taxes, both personal and corporate, so that we actually send money back to the taxpayers because they know best how to spend that money.
Very good. Same question, Ms. Pacquiao. What should the priorities be for our state tax system, as you see it, and budgeting in the coming years?
Over half of the money from the state taxes that are taken in is spent on education, and 70% of my property taxes is spent on education. We are not getting the bang for the buck right now, because what we're doing is our state has to come up with a plan that we submit to the U.S. Department of Education, and they have to approve it. That plan has to include the same standards for everyone throughout the entire state, and those standards are too low. As a math education professor, I went line by line and saw that those standards were 1 to 2 years behind, and now not only do we have language arts and math, we have science and social studies, the same standards for all. The science standards are not that scientific. The social studies standards omit really important things in our history and emphasize other things in our history, and they're biased. So we need to take that money that we have for education, which is quite a bit of money, and we need to be able to exit the federal government from controlling our schools, because right now we have a school rating system that is controlled by the federal Department of Education. And it's not about can kids read. It's not about can kids do math. Can kids reach their full potential? Because they have to be stuck in these lower level standards. They're not reaching their destiny. We see these standards have been in effect already more than 4 years. And we see that kids are being affected by what the federal government is doing in our schools. So we need laws, better laws. And in fact, I have a whole list right here of laws that need to be repealed. There are about 21 laws that need to be repealed at the state level because they mirror what's happening in the federal laws. Okay. Right. There are other laws too that need to be repealed that aren't education laws, but I'll talk about those later.
Well, I think we're about to come up on that, but I just want to ask Mr. Bonner, do you have a rebuttal?
Well, I would just say that when it comes to education, District 72 is extremely blessed. We've got great public schools, as evidenced by the fact that District 72 is the only district in the state of Georgia that has had back-to-back school superintendents of the year. Last year was Dr. Jody Barrow from Fayette County, and this year Steve Barker from Coweta County. So I think that's a good reflection of our community, but we also offer a lot of other choices which we ought to enhance as well.
All right. Rebuttal?
The problem with that is it's not about the superintendent. I was on the school board. It's about the teachers in the classroom. And if you talk to the teachers in the classroom, you will know that the whole way that they're being evaluated makes them have to teach to these dumbed-down standards for their evaluation. It also makes them have to use a behavior system that is not effective from the federal government. So the teachers are really struggling with those things. That's what I want to change.
Okay. Well, in fact, I think we're going to continue talking about that. I have right here my questions in front of me. We're going to talk about education a little bit. Big goal, I think it's fair to say, met this year when at least the QBE formula was fully funded by the General Assembly. But there are a number of facets of education and educational reform that folks are looking at in the state of Georgia. So starting with you, Ms. Bacayo, what do you see as Georgia's most pressing K through 12 educational issues? What would your priorities be in the General Assembly?
We need to repeal the current corrupt and federally hijacked school rating system. It doesn't measure whether kids can read. And if the federal government can control our school rating system with bonus points for federally backed programs, they can control everything we do every single day. And kids are hurting. Kids are really hurting. So we definitely need to repeal that. We also need to put the parents and the teachers back in charge. The parents and the teachers are the ones that care the most about the kids. And I go out into the schools and I see this happening every day, where they're having to do the federal protocol. What they learn, when they learn it, how they're assessed is all standardized. And all kids are different. Some kids are ready to move on. Some kids aren't ready for that.
Very good. Mr. Bonner, same question to you. What would what are your priorities for K through 12 education in Georgia?
Well, as you mentioned, this past session we were able to pass legislation that fully funded QBE, which is the first time since that formula was created. So for the first time, we will be able to see, is the question simply a matter of money? I would submit that it's not. There are a lot of other factors that go into a quality school system and a quality education. I believe a strong community is one which has lots of options for educational choice. For my kids, we started them off in a small Christian school of about 50 students that was very heavily parent involved and parent led, and that worked out real well, and that was where we wanted our kids at the time. It was a biblically based education. Now my children have aged out of that school and they're in the public school, and they're thriving in that environment. In our community throughout District 72 has embraced our schools, and I think that's what makes our schools so good.
Rebuttal.
Every school has to do the exact same thing. There's no choice. So even if you have taxpayer money going to charter schools, there's still no choice because they're all doing the same thing. I went into a 7th grade class the other day, and the teacher was concerned because they were having to talk about us rebuilding Japan without ever talking about what happened in Pearl Harbor. So there's no context. And that's what I'm talking about, being these standards are the same for everybody. House Bill 502 took all parent and student discretion over what's learned away. We need to put parent and student discretion back and put the local school boards back in charge.
Very good. Mr. Bonner, rebuttal?
So I share the same goal as a lot of other folks in our community, and that is to make our public schools a very attractive choice for families if they want their kids to go there. At the same time, I believe that our families ought to have other choices for private education, homeschooling, if they so choose, and they ought to get some assistance to do that. So this past session, we were able to increase the opportunity scholarships from $58 million all the way to $100. These are funds that my family was able to make use of when we had our kids at a private school.
Very Good. We'll leave it there. We'll move on to a couple of other issues. We'll talk about economic development in general and infrastructure. And let me just ask you very broadly, and we'll start with Mr. Bonner on this one. 1 minute response. What do you see as Georgia's most important, in your view, most important economic development priority right now?
Well, I would say it's our workforce. So there's no doubt that industry is attracted to Georgia for a number of reasons, most particularly for our tax structure, for a lot of the incentives that we offer to corporations. But our biggest challenge is that we have companies that are here in Georgia and that want to come to Georgia, that we don't have a workforce to fill those jobs. We have thousands upon thousands of jobs in every industry across this state that need people to work today. And we're not talking about jobs of the future, we're talking about jobs today. So what we need to do is increase the availability of a productive workforce here in the state of Georgia so that we can get Georgians to work and that we can continue to make Georgia a great place to be, to not only start a business, but to also grow a business.
Very well. Ms. Bacall, what do you see as being the most important economic development issue in Georgia today?
We need to take care of transportation. I think transportation is a huge problem. And right now, in the state of Georgia, we have $1.8 billion going for transportation from the motor fuel tax, from the taxes that have to go for transportation. No additional money. What I'm really concerned about, though, is one particular bill that I would have voted no to, which the incumbent voted yes to, and that is Senate Bill 183. What that bill did was it made it so that we could be like Panama. I don't want to be like Panama. And what I'm saying by that is we can have public-private partnerships for the building of roads and bridges and toll roads. I don't want a private entity, a LLC, someone from another country, or some kind of company owning our toll roads. And then we have to pay for the tolls that go to a company or a private, individual. I think Georgia needs to own the roads in Georgia. That's a huge slippery slope, and that's why I say I would not have voted for that one. I don't think we should be like Panama. I think we should own our own roads and be able to pay for them because we have money in the budget that we can use to pay for better roads.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Rebuttal, Mr. Bonner?
I would just say that if we're not trying to explore every conceivable option to address what my opponent says is her number one issue with economic development, then I would say that we're not doing Georgians what we ought to be doing up at the state capitol.
Rebuttal, Ms. Bacall?
It's really something that's not part of our American tradition, our American culture, to have a private company own public roads. And it not only does it allow a private company to own and charge tolls, it also eliminates the provision that we would have the lowest bid. There is a line in the bill, and I brought the bill with me if anyone wants to look at it, that says in some cases, we don't have to take the lowest bid. So there's room in there for corruption and crony capitalism and exploitation of our citizens, and I don't like that.
Very good. We'll move on to another question, but it's really on roads as well. Let me just ask you in general. Specifically, I'll ask you about the transit expansion bill. It allows 13 metro Atlanta counties to impose sales taxes of up to 1% for mass transit, among other things. Creates a regional board to oversee transit funding and construction. How might that affect the people in your district? And what do you think the next steps are in tackling Georgia's transportation and infrastructure issues? And we'll start with you, Ms. Bacall.
Okay, can you repeat the question?
Absolutely. Really, it's just about transportation. So I know I'm throwing a lot into this bucket.
Okay.
But specifically, I'm asking about the transit expansion bill. How might that affect the people of your district in the coming years?
I was thinking about my answer, and then you ended your question. So let me go back to.
I apologize.
Let me go back to my answer. I remember when a long time ago, when Sam Olens was running for Attorney General, he came and he spoke with our group at the Fayette County Republican Women. And he talked about getting those trucks off the perimeter, getting them off, getting them out of going through downtown. And so that's something that, regionally we could get together and do. have another road, maybe an interstate, even a Georgia road, where the trucks, can get from Savannah to wherever else they want to go and not have to go through Atlanta. Why don't we have that? We need that. I think that's something that a regional commission could do. But I think that every single decision that's going to be happening in a local community, say Fayette County, Coweta County, that needs to go through the local elected officials. I don't think someone from outside should come in and tell us where our roads need to go, because we know where the roads need to go because we live in this area.
Mr. Bonner, same question.
Sure. So just a couple of things. Number one, we're really talking about two different issues. Transportation is our roads and bridges. Our transit, that's your buses and rail. So what was voted on was a transit bill which allowed collectively that those 13 metro counties to get some sort of organization, basically, to take all these separate transit entities and get some sort of coalescing so there could be some efficiencies found. Now, I was a no vote on this particular bill, both in the House and then when it came back from the Senate, because it simply did not reflect kind of what we're looking for in District 72 down in Peachtree City, Brooks, and Sonoy. We certainly don't have a need right now for any buses or any light rail, which runs about $1 million a track mile. So two separate things, but essentially we do need to get a handle on how we're going to move that workforce to the jobs.
Rebuttal, Ms. Pacquiao?
No.
All right. Our next question, we'll start with Mr. Bonner. Let me just ask you generally about healthcare in Georgia. If you could, tell us what you see as some of the biggest healthcare issues facing the state of Georgia right now.
Sure. So again, here in District 72, we're incredibly blessed. We've got great access to healthcare really throughout Fayette, Coweta, throughout the metro area. We've got great access to healthcare, but it doesn't take to drive more than an hour outside of any one of our metro counties before that access to healthcare drops dramatically. And it doesn't make sense with those smaller populations and those smaller economies necessarily to have a hospital in every county, things like that. So we've got to look at creative ways to provide the same services for our citizens in our rural parts of our state to those that we have in the metro area. So whether that is looking at our certificate of need laws in order to introduce more competition and a level playing field to the marketplace, or if we adopt models that push out healthcare down to basically the end user level.
Very well. Ms. Pacquiao, the biggest healthcare issues facing Georgia, in your view?
I would say we need less federal involvement, less federal control, and more local control. We need more doctors, we need more nurses, we need more hospitals. So we need all of that in Georgia, and that comes from being number one in education. We can be number one in education. We just have to kick the federal government out of our state when it comes to education, and then we could have the best doctors, nurses, the best research institutions, because our kids from an early age, instead of being dumbed down in math and science, they'll actually be challenged in math and science and like those things and go into those areas and become the next generation of doctors and nurses and researchers.
Very good. Thank you, ma'am. Rebuttal, Mr. Bonner?
I would say ultimately what we've got to do is we've got to take, we've got the person that needs the care, we've got the person that wants to provide the care. We need to get rid of everything in between the two so that we can bring those two together and actually provide that care in a sensible way at a sensible cost and provide that health care to our citizens.
And rebuttal, Ms. Pacquiao?
Healthcare costs are skyrocketing because, it's insurance, and then there's the government involved in insurance. And that just complicates it even more. So if we think about the charity hospitals that we used to have, the Baptist hospitals, the Catholic hospitals, what happened to those? We're, as a nation, as a state, going to other places and serving them and giving them all of these things for healthcare. We can do that here, too. We don't just have to, we could do it around the world, but we can also do that here. So we have more charity and more love going around at home.
Thank you very much. Listen, we're going to come to the end of our forum tonight. We're going to go into 2-minute opening statements. Apologize, I know there are probably a number of issues y'all might like to talk about we haven't gotten around to. We haven't even talked about Amazon at all tonight. So, but bring up anything you'd like to in your 2-minute closing statement. But Ms. Pacquiao, we'll start with you for your closing statement.
Okay, thank you. I'm just a regular person. My husband of 28 years, going on 29, and we have 4 children. They've gone through, Fayette County schools. I wanted to make the schools better. I got on the school board, and I was just shut down at everything. 4-1. I was outvoted. And then I realized that that's not where the decisions are being made. The decisions are being made at the state level and the federal level. So I need to go down there because right now there's no one else down there like me who reads the bills, who understands about what it's like to be a mom, what it's like to be a teacher, and has the research base to understand not only education, but other areas so that we can make sure that our citizens are not exploited and our citizens are free to fulfill the destiny that they have.
And your closing statement, Mr. Bonner.
Well, thank you. Thank you to Mary Kay. Thank you, Dean. Thank you to the Chamber for hosting this. I'll just tell you, out of all the things that I've done in my life up to this point, it surely has been an honor to serve the citizens of District 72 over the last year and a half. The fact that they overwhelmingly voted me into office to fill an empty seat and have supported me throughout this time during 2 sessions where we were able to do some historic things to reduce the income tax, both personal and corporate, to fully fund the quality basic education formula, to invest in some of our infrastructure, to do things for our veterans, like make it easier for them to obtain licensing in the state of Georgia. All of these things are impactful, and they will help move Georgia forward. Georgia's done a great job, I think, like I said, moving from the Great Recession to where we are today, and we're moving in the right direction. What we need to do is reinforce the success that we've had, and we need to relook at some of the priorities that we have established so that we can not only be a #1 place for doing business, but also the #1 place to raise a family, the #1 place to educate our children, the #1 place for charities, #1 across the board. That should be our ultimate goal, and I think that I am the candidate that is uniquely qualified to be a part of that process and to help get us there. Thank you.
Thank you both. That concludes our forum. To Mary Kay Bacalhau and to Josh Bonner, thank you both for being here tonight. Thank you both for running for this important office. We appreciate it. You did well.
Thank you.
And we're going to take a break, and we'll come back and hear from candidates running for U.S. Congress, both in the Democratic primary and in the Republican primary. We're going to have Marvin McCoy and Ginger Queener take over the moderating duties. Stay with us.
We will now begin this evening's forum for candidates running in the partisan primary for the U.S. Congressional District 3 Democratic primary. Welcome to Chuck Enderlin and to Rusty Oliver, who will face each other in the May 22nd ballot. I am Marvin McCoy, and I'm joined by Ginger Queener, who will be serving as the timekeeper for this forum. I remind both our candidates to watch for the signals from our timekeeper and to confine your responses to the allotted time. We will start with Mr. Enderlin, his opening statements. Please tell us a little bit about yourself personally and professionally and why you are seeking election, and you have 2 minutes.
Good evening. Thanks for having us to the Chamber and for everybody watching. I'm Chuck Enderlin, and I'm your next U.S. Representative. A few years ago, as I prepared to leave active duty military service and begin my airline career, my wife and I faced a difficult choice. We had to find a place to call home, somewhere where we could put down roots and begin to raise our family. We looked at cities all over the country, and we chose Newnan, Georgia. We chose Newnan because of its vibrant businesses, restaurants, art galleries, and a population that has proven itself to be Newnan strong. Newnan is setting the example, attracting industry through innovative programs like the Georgia CAP program, and laying the foundation for a bright future. But guaranteeing that future requires strong leadership at all levels, and that's why I'm running for Congress. We need leaders who understand that rising wages create new business opportunities, customers, and markets. Leaders who are committed to the debt that we owe our veterans through the Veterans Administration and are resistant to efforts to privatize it. Leaders who understand that by offering health insurance through a Medicare buy-in, we can't just keep our hospitals open, but we will help them thrive. And leaders who are committed to make our excellent schools safer for all children by ending the threat of gun violence. Now, building this future takes more than just sound policy. It requires strong servant leadership, and that's something that I've practiced my whole life, from Cub Scouts all the way through my current career as a Marine officer. It requires leaders who understand that being in Congress is primarily a responsibility to your constituents. I am that leader, and I'm honored to have this opportunity to serve my home. I look forward to representing every one of you in Congress.
All right, Mr. Oliver.
Good evening. Thank you to the Chamber for having us here tonight. I look forward for this opportunity to share a little bit about myself. I was born outside of Atlanta to a broken home, and upon reaching the age, I attended the University of Georgia on my own dime through hard work, student loans that I've had to pay off. And then after graduating from the UGA, I settled in Columbus, where I've lived here in the 3rd District now for 24 years with my wife, Jennifer, and raising our 2 sons. I'm a high school science teacher, so I've served this community, this district already for 22 years. I'm running because 2 years ago, I had the misfortune of having one spinal surgery turn into 3 spinal surgeries. And without health care, that would have been a burden of over $500,000 on my family. So the first catalyst that led me to run was the administration currently in office wantonly wanting to throw off 10, 20, 30 million people off of health care. Secondly, I saw immediately our administration not protecting our environment. I've been an environmental champion my whole life. I enjoy being out of doors. I've visited our public lands, and I've made it a personal goal to visit all of our national parks before I pass away. Our current administration is not doing that. It's not protecting our environment. The rollback of the protections that the Obama administration put in have been daily rolled back by our cabinet officials that are there to protect them, Zinke and Pruitt. And third, upon seeing what happened after the last election, I saw that we were not being represented. And I'm frankly tired of not being represented, and I truly believe that I'm going to be the one to be a voice for everyone in this district. Thank you.
All right, the first question, thank you again for your opening statements. And the first question is going to go to you, Mr. Oliver. And it is, please elaborate on why you want to seek this office, and are you willing to make the commitment for all the time and effort and fully perform all the duties, the official, the ceremonial, everything that goes along with this office?
I am more than ready and willing to fulfill every requirement of this office. In fact, I'll be glad when the campaigning's over and I can actually get to the work. Again, the reasons I'm running are that I feel that we have not been represented. I've lived here for over half of my life in this district and have never been represented. I was already doing this job months ago, calling out the incumbent daily on social media, by phone, by text message. Every time a vote was cast, I would ask the question, how does that help the people in the 3rd District? And I would never get a response. The votes that need to be cast for this district need to be for the people of this district, which is one of the most diverse in the state. We're here in Newnan, but we have 13 counties in this district that need to be represented, and right now they are not being.
All right. Mr. Enderlin?
Speaking to the commitment, as a military officer, I know that I'm on duty 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and I know it will be the same way as a United States congressman. I'm looking forward to taking on that opportunity to serve my constituents, because that's why we get into the business of public service. I've served my country for almost 20 years now, going wherever they needed, serving in locations both safe and not so safe. And I want to continue that service and work for the people of Coweta County. They've been great enough to let me come here and welcome me and help me build a new home for my family. And that's something I want to give back to. I want to make sure that everybody in this county has the opportunities that I had. Everybody across the district has those opportunities to grow, to live the American dream, and to build a more perfect union.
Mr. Oliver, would you care for a rebuttal?
Just one last thing. I think we're all tired of the polarity in this country, and I believe it's behoving upon our government to end that. And with me, the buck's going to stop. I'm going to reach across the aisle, and we're going to get things done in Washington.
Mr. Enderlin?
Ending that polarity starts with having issues and ideas and policies that carry across aisles. As I've gone around and talked to people, it's been both Democrats and Republicans, and every single one of them, when I talk to them, we find that common ground. We can find that agreement, and that's the sort of bridge building that I'll bring to the U.S. Congress.
Thank you. All right, the next question is going to focus on the economy. The Federal Reserve reported on Wednesday that the overall outlook among U.S. businesses remains positive and on track for growth. It cited robust business borrowing, rising consumer spending, and a tight labor market. The outlying risk, they noted, was the recent imposition of tariffs on steel and aluminum and the continuing trade dispute with China. How do you see the U.S. economic outlook, and what do you see as the consequences for the current trade dispute? And we'll give you 2 minutes on this one.
Thank you, Marvin. The current U.S. economic outlook is very strong for companies, but it's very perilous for the workers who are involved in it. We've seen our labor unions eroded over the past 20 years. We've seen wages decrease as productivity has increased. We've seen our minimum wage remain stagnant, and we've seen this last year a tax cut bill that is really more of a payday loan for the average American worker. Anyone making anyone making under $75,000 a year, the vast majority of American households, gets a net tax increase from the Tax Cut and Jobs Act that Drew Ferguson so happily signed into law. The tariffs that we're facing are going to have the opposite of the intended effect. Tariffs never attack the people that they're intended to. They always go after the consumers. If American companies see foreign companies having to pay more or charge more for their goods and services, American companies will do what capitalism expects them to: raise their prices just a little bit, increase corporate profits, and pass those burdens on to the consumers. The trade war with China is something that there will be no winners in. And it's something that a strong hand in the U.S. Congress can help curtail the current administration, perhaps educate them a little bit on how tariffs work and how impossible trade wars are to win, and make the economy better for every American.
All right, Mr. Oliver?
When you look at the economy based on percentages, it's easy to manipulate numbers and statistics. And that's what's being fed to us daily, percentages. My average take-home pay as a result of the new tax bill was $37 a month. And I don't know about the people in this room, but I can't afford another house payment with an extra $37 a month. Not to mention that those taxes are going to be taken away from us in a few years. Meanwhile, corporate America still will thrive and feed off of the communities in which they're built with these tax cuts that they will still maintain. We have to provide a working wage, a livable working wage, to everyone in this state. As automation becomes more prevalent in our jobs, we have to focus on creating jobs, and that starts with education. As a career educator, I have the foresight to start looking ahead and providing pathways to students beyond a normal 4-year college degree, and with apprenticeships and internships, and incorporating the economy with education is going to only improve our economy. The trade war with China is something that is frivolous. It's rhetoric that we do not need to get into, and if one were to look at it, it simply harms the American workers. And China is smart enough to know which companies to go after, which states to go after, and it's obvious that they're targeted, and it's only going to hurt the American people.
All right, we're going to allow a 45-second rebuttal. Mr. Enderlin, do you have a rebuttal?
Yes, thank you. The minimum wage needs to be raised. It needs to be raised to at least $15 an hour. It needs to be indexed to inflation, not the changed CPI that Republicans like to use. And that way it can provide for a living for any American who is working full time. Now, with automation, my industry, the airline industry, is under threat of that right now. There is a bill in Congress right now that will waste money studying single pilot operations in cargo aircraft. This will decrease safety, increase costs, and cause problems. If we want to fix this, we have to elect representatives who understand the complexities of economics and who will fight to make sure that the American worker is protected.
All right, Mr. Oliver.
No, thank you.
Well, we're going to continue on the same theme. So you may have shared a little bit about your opinions, but what is your official opinion in regard to the tax cuts and the Job Acts, the Tax Cut and Job Acts of 2017, and what steps should be taken on the U.S. tax rates and the tax structure at this point?
You want me to start?
And this will go to Mr. Oliver.
We need to revisit the current tax structure for the individual. Again, they're not going to work for the average American worker unless they're in the top 2% of wage earners in this state and this nation. My family doesn't fall into that. Most of the people in the 3rd District do not fall into that wage category. So we need to revisit that. And we need to, again, look at corporate America, look at how much money they are shipping offshores and not being taxed. And we only have to look back to the early 2004, 2005, when corporations were given amnesty to bring capital back into our nation that they had shipped offshore, with the presumption that all of that money would trickle down faster into higher wages and to the communities where these corporations were found. It was found that jobs actually decreased, wages actually decreased, and even with this amnesty that corporations were provided, there was no trickle-down benefit as promoted by our current administration.
All right, Mr. Enderlin.
The tax cuts in the Tax Cut and Jobs Act for incomes under $400,000 need to be made permanent. They are currently not. They need to be pegged to the real CPI, not chained CPI, which is designed to, or just doesn't reflect the actual increase in the cost of goods. Going beyond that, we do need to close our corporate loopholes so that companies like Apple, who offshore to take advantage of tax benefits, don't pay 0 on corporate income taxes. We need to raise the top rates in our income tax, asking those who have benefited outsized and gained outsized benefits from our economy to give back just a little bit to the country that has given them so many blessings. And we need to embrace the reality. The supply side economics of the past 30 years have failed us. We need to go back and accept that when workers have more money in their pockets, they create more economic activity, and that economic activity is what will help our country grow.
All right, Mr. Oliver, would you like to have a rebuttal?
Again, we just need to ensure that the corporations that are receiving the greatest benefit from these tax cuts, that they understand what it means to be part of a community again, like the old mills that we look around this district that have been shut down over the past century. There was a time when the businesses, the industries of the towns were actually a part of the community. And again, if corporations are going to receive these benefits, then they need to give back tangibly to the people of their communities.
All right, Mr. Enderlin.
I'm proud to be part of a community where the businesses are a part of it. We saw that last Friday night, and I see that every time I go downtown for lunch.
All right. Well, we're going to change gears a little bit here and look at some of the other issues facing the country. What is your view on the various gun control proposals that are being debated nationwide, and what do you see as the best way for the U.S. to address gun violence? And this will begin with Mr. Enderlin.
So in my years as a United States Marine, I've qualified as an expert pistol shot, an expert rifle shot, and I've coached incoming freshmen on the M9 service pistol at the Naval Academy. I'm very experienced with weapons handling. And that's because the Marine Corps and the military as a whole has a culture of safety and responsibility in weapons ownership. We need to bring this culture of safety and responsibility into the civilian marketplace. We need to make sure that before you bring a weapon home, you understand how to use it, how to carry it, how to store it, and how to make sure that no one gets shot accidentally from it. If you have a weapon that is not properly secured in your house and it's stolen and used in a crime, you need to bear some responsibility for that weapon being stolen. We can do this because this is the same thing that the U.S. military does. We have a very strong weapon safety culture. And if we bring that weapon safety culture into our national discussion, we can make a safer place and reduce the gun violence we see.
All right, Mr. Oliver.
We've had so many mass shootings, and I'll just first state for the record that as a classroom teacher, I will never carry a firearm into my classroom. These patchwork attempts at trying to fix a larger problem will not work. We have to address the situation head on. we have to acknowledge that we need firearm legislation that makes sense in this country. We need to stop using the Second Amendment as a litmus test. We need to stop using terms like gun control, and we need to stop with this rhetoric that Democrats want to take guns away from anyone. I am a proud owner of a gun. I've taught my sons how to handle firearms properly. I'm a hunter. Fortunately for the animals I hunt, I'm not a good hunter, but I'm still a hunter nonetheless. We need to, again, pass legislation that we can agree on in bipartisan fashion that was agreed upon in merit right after Las Vegas. Bump stocks is something that we can all agree on and pass and start making strides. Again, when we have the children of our nation having to speak for the adults, there is a problem that needs to be addressed now.
Mr. Newnan, would you like a rebuttal?
We have a weapons violence epidemic. If we can talk to each other, if we can understand that we share common goals, no one wants their weapons used in a crime. No one wants their rounds going anywhere they didn't aim or anywhere they're intended. And everyone who shoots wants to hit what they're aiming for the first time, every time. By starting there, we can find solutions that not only reduce gun violence, but protect people's right to hunt.
All right, Mr. Oliver.
We need to address, again, not just the firearms side of this legislation, but we also need to address the reasons why people make the choices that they do and choose to commit mass murders.
All right, with drugs devastating communities all across the country, what is the best answer to the U.S. opioid epidemic, and what are the steps that Congress can take? And this one goes to Mr. Oliver first.
We need to put research into the opioid epidemic. We've heard about it for years now. It's been a talking point, and we have seen little to nothing done about it from the federal to the state level. There was talk today of introducing legislation to perhaps use cannabis as a intermediate to curtail the opioid epidemic. So we need to look at all of our options. But we do need to stop talking about this and address it head on. And again, this involves education of our youth from an early age to not get involved in drugs. It involves health care, preventative health care, so that people that had surgeries like mine didn't have to experience the pain that I did. And it involves the care of people post-surgery and through the investment of recovery efforts.
All right, Mr. Enderlin.
Congress can do several things. The first thing it can do is take away the money and end the disastrous war on drugs. This has been going on for decades and has done little more than incarcerate young black men at a higher rate than the general population. Congress has the authority to reschedule marijuana off of Schedule 1, allowing it to be studied for medical use and clearing the way for states to actually legalize it without the threat of ATF enforcement or the FBI coming in and raiding their dispensaries that are contributing to their economy. With opioids in particular, we have a problem, and we're going to need to increase our healthcare access. We can do this with a Medicare buy-in, but beyond that, we have to be willing to go after doctors who abuse prescriptions and prescribe too many opioid drugs. Just today, news broke that Dr. Ronnie Jackson, nominee to be Secretary of the Veterans Administration, has had his nomination placed on hold because of overprescriptions. This is something that we can end and must end if we are to combat the opioid epidemic.
All right, Mr. Oliver, would you like a rebuttal?
Again, it comes down to education and putting money into our health care now, not putting it on hold. We need to have bold ideas now, and we need to act on those ideas and that legislation now.
All right, Mr. Enderlin.
Medicare buy-in is a bold idea that can be implemented right now, and that from Republicans I have talked to about it who are looking for a new health care plan, they would be happy to have that option.
All right, what changes, if any, would you favor on the U.S. immigration law and policy? And we'll start off with Mr. Enderlin.
Our immigration law is a Byzantine mess that makes it almost impossible for someone to come to this country legally. I served with another Navy sailor who married a British woman, and he's trying to bring her parents over. And they're looking at about a 10-year backlog just to get an elderly couple over so that they can help take care of them in their old age. For someone who is here legally and wants to sponsor a brother or sister from Mexico, the on-paper wait is 10 years, but the reality is it's closer to 100 years when you account for the backlog and the increase in cases. We need to restore the DACA program. We need to make sure that children who are brought here by their parents have citizenship. We need to make sure that people who come to this country can earn citizenship, either through military service, earning a degree, or simply by contributing to society over a course of 5 years and staying out of trouble. And we need to make sure that any immigrant who wants to come to this country can have a pathway to citizenship that takes less than 5 years to earn.
All right, Mr. Oliver.
Having taught the students of Fort Benning for over 20 years, I had the privilege of teaching a lot of students that were international training as their parents trained at the Army base there at Fort Benning. It goes without saying, first and foremost, we need a clean DACA Act. This was a presidential order that President Trump unfortunately put the burden on Congress to fix, and our broken legislature could not get it done. So first and foremost, we need a clean DACA Act. No riders, no attachments, just a clean DACA Act. We need to afford the opportunity for those that are in this country by no choice of their own, children no less, to have a pathway to citizenship. They do not need to come home and see that their parents have been taken away by ICE enforcers. We need to, again, steer away from terms like sanctuary cities, which imply that these are havens for people that are not native to this country, that are naturally born enemies of our naturally born citizens. Again, we need to offer pathways to citizenships to these people, and again, steer away from the rhetoric, and again, offer people that want to work in this country and become American citizens that pathway.
All right, Mr. Lynn, would you like a rebuttal?
Speaking of the Immigration and Customs Enforcement branch, the current administration is attempting to turn ICE from a law enforcement mechanism into nothing but a bullying force or bounty hunters for people who are coming to this country. That has to end. Congress can do that. We just need to elect representatives with the will to do so.
All right, Mr. Oliver, your rebuttal.
I'll take the opportunity to say that an asinine idea like the border wall, if it doesn't come up at some other point in this forum, this would be my privilege to say that spending billions, which will turn into trillions of dollars, which is something that will not only infringe on eminent domain, but is also environmentally unfriendly, and also a slap in the face to our neighbors to the south. We need to ensure that the border wall does not come up as any part of this discussion.
All right. Well, thank you all very much for answering some tough questions. And we're now going to move to the closing statements. And Mr. Oliver, you get to go first. 2 minutes.
Again, thank you to the Chamber and to the people of Newnan for your hospitality tonight. This is actually the third weekend in a row that I've been in Newnan. We've had some nationally making news that have brought me here. Since I started my campaign, I've traveled literally over 9,000 miles in this district, talking to the people of this district. Just as an education, I feel that this is a calling for me. I'm not running based on ego. I'm not running for the namesake. I'm not running for the increase in salary. Heaven knows anything besides what a teacher pays would be an increase in salary. I'm running for the people in this room. I'm running for my family. I'm running for the people of this district that I've lived with, worked with, sweated with for the past 24 years of my life, and I look forward to representing you in Congress.
All right, Mr. Enderlin.
I want to thank the Chamber for hosting this event along with the Central Educational Center. I want to thank Marvin for moderating and Mr. Oliver for running and helping to make me a better candidate. Now, I've spent my life in service to my country, wherever my country has needed me, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to continue that service as a United States Congressman. Tonight, you've had a chance to hear my vision for America's future and how we can build that future through strong policies backed by strong leadership. We have a rare opportunity this year, not just to compete in this district, but to actually win it. This isn't just optimism. House Bill 4, the FAA reauthorization bill, is working through committee right now. And today, there was changes to it made to the family leave policy, protecting family sick leave and making sure that pilots and flight attendants don't have to lie to their employers. That change would not have happened if Drew Ferguson did not have a credible challenger from the Democratic Party. We have a chance to do what Pennsylvania did, to send a Marine veteran, a first-time candidate, and a Democrat to Congress from a traditionally Republican district. But if we want to flip this seat, it starts with nominating the best candidate. Not any Democrat can win this race. We need to nominate a proven leader, someone with the moral character and the courage to do the right thing. Early voting starts next week. Vote for your school boards, vote for Stacey for governor, and then vote Chuck Enderlin for Congress. Together, we can build a more perfect union. Thank you.
All right, well, that concludes our forum, and I want to thank Mr. Enderlin and Mr. Oliver and wish both of you good luck on the primary on May 22nd. And we'll take a break, and then we'll hear from the Republican candidates for the 3rd Congressional District. Thank y'all.
Thank you.
Begin this evening's forum for candidates running in the partisan primary for the U.S. Congressional District 3 Republican primary. Welcome to Philip Singleton, who faces incumbent Drew Ferguson in this year's Republican primary on May 22nd. Representative Ferguson accepted an invitation to participate in our primary, but is in Washington and could not attend. He has submitted a taped statement. I am now joined by Dean Jackson, who will serve as timekeeper for this forum. We will start with Mr. Ferguson's taped statement.
Hello, I'm Congressman Drew Ferguson, and I'm running for re-election to continue to serve the good people of the 3rd District of Georgia. I'm sorry I can't be with you tonight, but we have votes scheduled here in Washington, D.C. When you sent me to Congress, I promised I would work to make America the best place in the world to do business. Working with the Trump administration, we have rolled back burdensome regulations and passed the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act to finally help American businesses be competitive on the global stage, and we are already seeing the positive benefits here in the 3rd District. Local businesses like Aflac, Southwire, and Total System Services are investing in their workers and their communities, and Georgians are seeing more money in their paychecks every single week. We're blessed to be leading the way here in Coweta County with programs like the CEC to help prepare our young people for successful careers. These programs have inspired me to champion improving educational opportunities available for the next generation. Whether students are looking for a traditional 4-year college or a career in technical college education, I have worked to make it easier for them to prepare for careers in the 21st century. We still have a lot of work to do. Our budget process is broken, creating a $21 trillion debt and impossible choices that threaten not only the futures of our children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, but they put our military at risk. We can and must do better. We must create a realistic budget process that balances the federal budget. It has to we have to be able to defend our nations and serve our citizens, and I'm committed to working through with my colleagues to have the very difficult and honest conversations that we have to have so that we can keep our promises for future generations to come. Again, I thank you for your support, and I wish I could be with you tonight.
Now, Mr. Singleton, please tell us a little bit about yourself, personally and professionally, and tell us why you're seeking election.
Well, first I want to thank the Chamber for allowing me to be here and putting this forum on. I think it's a great venue. My name is Philip Singleton. I was born and raised Fayette County. Spent most of my childhood there. I met my wife in middle school. We went to church together. We were high school sweethearts. Went to Georgia State University where I was studying pre-med when 9/11 happened. I remember George Bush standing in front of the World Trade Center in the rubble, and he called, said that we were under attack. So 9 days later, I answered that call and I joined the U.S. Army. Intended to do a very short tour and serve my country. Ended up serving 15 years in the Army. Did 3 combat tours out of Fort Campbell as a Screaming Eagle, 101st Airborne Division. Flew AH-64 Apache helicopters. Was able to lead men in combat. I was very blessed in my military career to have a wide berth of responsibilities and a tremendous opportunity to learn and grow. Spent 7 years serving overseas. Was trained by the Army in Strategic and Joint Planning. Went to the Military Intelligence Captain's Career Course, Command and General Staff College. While in the Army on my own, I was able to earn a Master's in International Relations and a Master's degree in Aeronautical Science. I had an amazing opportunity to serve in South Korea. for the last 2 years. I actually left the service last summer. And I also was able to train NATO and allied forces serving in Europe. So the realization I came, service is a calling, and I felt called by God to continue serving. And while I was a major in the Army, watching what was happening back in Washington, seeing the divisiveness in the national media and the national parties with them bickering back and forth, and almost every message was the same message of the other side being incompetent or immoral or uneducated, and a real lack of understanding of what was going on in world events. And through prayer and a lot of thought, we decided that the best way I could fulfill my oath to support and defend the Constitution from all enemies, foreign and domestic, was to come back home and run for the United States Congress. So we answered God's calling, and I left the service last year, and I moved my family home, and have had the pleasure since then to be out running for Congress and sharing my message. So thanks for having me here.
Thank you. Mr. Singleton, please elaborate on what you would bring to the office that you're seeking, and most importantly, the position that you seek can often take a great deal of your time and effort. If elected, are you prepared to fulfill all of the duties, official and ceremonial, of this office?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a valid question, and it's a great question. So I'm prepared to not only campaign and the rigors that come back at home and making sure that I know what the people of the district, what's hurting them and what they need to help them, but I'm willing to actually go to Washington and do the things that I said I would do on the campaign trail. So my main priorities are the budget, individual liberty, and accountability. And you can read more about that on my website. But the big difference is, I'm prepared to go all in, serve for a short period of time, is the way I believe the founders intended when they framed the Constitution. I believe in term limits strongly, and then have the moral courage to stand up once you're actually in D.C. I will actually stand up for the values that I've been elected on and make sure that I pass legislation that is in sync with those values.
Thank you. The next question focuses on our economy. The Federal Reserve reported on Wednesday that the overall outlook among U.S. businesses remained positive and on track for growth, and cited robust business borrowing, rising consumer spending, and a tight labor market. The outlying risk, they noted, was the recent imposition of tariffs on steel and aluminum and continuing trade disputes with China. How do you see the U.S. economic outlook, and what do you see as the consequences of current trade disputes? You have 2 minutes.
Well, the economic outlook is very strong. The problem is our national debt. So we passed a revenue reduction bill when we passed the tax cuts that have had the intended consequences of stimulating the economy, especially in small business and corporations. We're seeing stuff like that every day in my life. I got a bonus check from my employer because of the tax cuts, and they attribute it to such. So it is growing, but the problem, our Congress pulled a sleight of hand, and then very nearly after they passed the tax cuts, they passed the second largest increase in government spending in the history of the United States. And these are the men and women that were elected on conservative values. It's a full Republican House and a full Republican Senate. And that massive debt increase, while the economy is growing now, is going to have the ultimate effect of stalling that growth. And so what we have to make sure we do is we have to have a balanced budget. It's not a matter of want. It's a matter of need, and it's a national security issue in addition to. So we talk about the tariffs. You can't talk about the tariffs if you don't talk about our debt. So a big problem with our trade war with China, and what the president is trying to do is he's trying to put us back on good footing in negotiations with China, who currently owns, I've read some estimates of over $8 trillion of our debt. So the problem when we continue our out-of-control deficit spending is that we lose the teeth in the discussion when we're talking about tariffs and this trade war that's being talked about. Other countries and other entities know that we don't have the longevity to hold out to our proportion of that trade war because of what our debt does to us. So we've got to address the debt first and foremost, and that will give us a significant opportunity to talk about the long-term effects of the economic stimulus that's happening with tax cuts.
Thank you. What is your opinion of the tax cut and the Jobs Act of 2017, and what steps should be taken on U.S. tax rate and tax structure at this point?
Well, so the tax cuts, I would have voted for it. My opponent's not here, but he talked about in his opening statement that he supported it. Now, he wasn't an author of the legislation, but it's all of his campaign material. But he did vote for it, like all the other Republican establishment. I would have voted for it too. I think it was a good thing for our country. I'm ultimately in favor of as little government intervention in our economy as absolute possible. I want the minimum intervention required so that capitalism can work and can grow. And so, my ultimate plan, I would love to get rid of the IRS altogether. I'm in favor of consumption tax. A flat tax would work. Consumption is my preference, but that would be a very long explanation for why that is, and I don't want to go over my time. So I do believe that the tax cuts were a good thing, but again, a revenue reduction bill, there's no business in America that could survive off of a revenue discussion before they've talked about an income discussion. And they reduced our revenue before we knew what we were going to spend. And that's why you're seeing this exploded deficit like we've never seen before and a almost uncontrolled growth in government. And we have to rein that back in.
Thank you. What is your view on various gun control proposals being debated nationwide, and what do you see as the best way to address U.S. gun violence?
Okay, so the gun control issue, it's a popular thing to talk about right now, but look, I believe that we have a culture problem in the United States, not a gun problem. I do believe that the issues we've seen with recent gun violence, and I say recent, we're talking about the last 2 decades, the increase in gun violence is attributable to our issues with our culture. And so I think it's unfair to talk about guns isolated from our culture. And, part of my second issue is individual liberty. And it's important to talk about that when we talk about the gun control because there's a reason that we're a democratic republic, not a pure democracy. And it's because the founders knew that we as citizens were most likely to infringe on our own liberty for reasons of security. And I believe Ben Franklin was right that if you're willing to trade up your liberties for your security, then you don't deserve either. So we have to be very careful when we talk about the Second Amendment rights. Those are protected for a reason because our founders knew that our propensity to want to give those rights up. And it's not just the Second Amendment, it's the First Amendment. My opponent voted for the FISA court in January. He was one of very few Republicans to do so, but what the FISA court did is it increased their ability to spy on American citizens without your knowledge outside of due process, which is exactly against our Constitution. So we have to be very careful when we talk about our liberties, and we have to defend them vehemently.
Thank you. What is the best answer to the U.S. opioid epidemic, and what steps can Congress take to help with this problem?
Well, so that, again, it seems like it doesn't parallel, but it actually perfectly parallels with the Second Amendment issue. So the opioid crisis is real, but America has a culture problem right now. And right now we're talking about opioid, but I would make the argument that America has an addiction problem. And that addiction problem is associated with things from being addicted to opioids, being addicted to pornography, being addicted to sugar, being addicted to likes on your phone. And Instagram. And we have a culture that is perpetually in search of that next dopamine hit. So, but that's a liberty issue too. So the federal government, we can do some things. We need to write legislation that enables local government to solve their local issues and stays out of them regulatorily. The opioid crisis in southern Georgia is a far different problem set to try to tackle and solve with a far different culture than the opioid crisis in Los Angeles. I mean, you're not going to reach the young men and women of South Georgia the same way and through the same methods and targeting as you would reach someone in Los Angeles. So the opioid crisis is another great example of a significant problem that can't be ignored, but doesn't need to be addressed at the federal level if it inhibits the ability of the local governments to address the issue.
Thank you. What changes, if any, would you favor on U.S. immigration law and policy?
So U.S. immigration law, I'm in opposition to the Republican establishment on this, which I know our president is as well. So the Republican Party, we have got to remember that our messaging, the Republican Party is a party that is pro-legal immigration. And so this messaging that's happening right now about all the focus on illegal immigration, we have laws in place that are designed to stop that. And we absolutely must secure our border, okay? And we have to secure our border, and we've got to make sure that we do it in a deficit-neutral way, and we take the time to make sure that we do everything properly and we don't infringe on those liberties locally. But the immigration, we need, the small business in America in particular, We need a workforce, and we need to make sure that stuff like the temporary seasonal visas, that we allow the renewal of those, because there are a significant amount of people that want to legally immigrate, and I am in support of legal immigration. And so we need to make it significantly easier. I served with one soldier from Micronesia that I helped get his citizenship as a U.S. soldier. He was one of my soldiers, Sergeant Segra. And the length of time and the amount of effort it took us to get him his citizenship for an active soldier who had served 2 combat tours was astronomical. I mean, it was unbelievable. And so we talk about our legal immigration problem. Well, a lot of that problem is solved if we fix our legal immigration system and we make that work. We should not be incentivizing people to have to sneak across the border.
Thank you. Healthcare is a hot topic now among the constituents here in this district. Tell us what changes you would look to make while in Congress, if elected.
Yeah, so healthcare is one of those issues. You know, I talk about Jim Jordan as a Freedom Caucus guy. He just did a great speech. You can check it on my website about the way that the Republican establishment, they just tried to pass a balanced budget amendment. And it was all the same people that voted, the same Republicans that voted, like my opponent, that voted for the massive spending increase so they could come back and tell you something different. But healthcare, they're doing the same thing with healthcare. And what they're doing is there are significant issues in our healthcare system. And I'm a free market capitalist. I believe in the power of the free market, and I think the government needs to stay as far away from things as possible. However, there are things right now. Right now we have a all or nothing, everything or bust Republican establishment in the House. And that's why we've seen no significant change. And that's also why we saw the massive look the other way when they completely failed to fulfill their promise to get rid of the Affordable Care Act for a complete repeal. But there are things we can do right now that would fix things. For example, there's a HIT tax that all small businessmen pay. And it was an unintended consequence of the Affordable Care Act, but essentially every small businessman had to pay a $200 tax for every employee that they employ that has health care. They're paying a portion of the insurance. So it's an unintended tax on small businesses. Even the Democrats that have supported the Affordable Care Act acknowledged that that was a bad tax, right? But every time the Republicans, including our incumbent, was addressed by the American Rental Association, the answer was, well, we could fix it. It would only take a one-page bill. But we really want the Affordable Care Act to make everyone's life so miserable that we can get full repeal, right? And that's immoral leadership. That's not leadership at all. So when I go to Washington, I'm going to make sure that we're doing small, measurable things to help improve the lives of everyday Americans, and I'm not going to be spending my time chasing party politics or trying to chase a career in Congress, because that's not what we're electing our servants to do.
Thank you. At this time, would you like to make your 2-minute closing statement?
Sure, I could talk all day. I have lots of thoughts, but you can go check out my website and my Facebook page. I always answer questions that are on there, and we have a lot of videos that are on there, so I encourage everyone to. I want to thank you guys again, the Chamber for having us, and Coweta for hosting. I thank the 2 Democrats running for our seat because they both came out today, and I think that that's exactly what we need as citizens, is the ability to talk about our issues. I understand the tactic. The height and weight tactic that my opponent's currently using for this seat. He's not the only one. It's common to all the establishment politicians in D.C. right now. They're really hoping that this wave of Republicans that are people first Republicans just kind of passes over and they can retain their seats and stay in power. But, American, the way we win this election, and the reason that I'm going to beat my opponent is the only way that he wins is if the American political process doesn't work the way our founders intended. And I believe we're seeing in our district right now that it is working. So the grassroots movement, I'm not taking any PAC money. It's about my message. It's about servant leadership. And we're seeing a swell of volunteers, and the message is getting passed that we have an alternative to big money politics. And we can beat the PAC money and the establishment when it comes to May 22nd. So I just want to tell all the viewers that we really appreciate your time, and just be educated and informed. Get out and know your candidates. Know what they say they're going to do, and more importantly, know what they have actually done. And when you have a candidate that is saying one thing and doing something else, then he needs to be replaced. And I just look forward to serving the 3rd District, and I really appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you. That concludes our forum. Thank you, Mr. Singleton, and thank you, Congressman Ferguson, for joining us via video. Good luck to you both on May the 22nd.
That concludes our forums for this year's nonpartisan races and partisan primaries coming up on the May 22nd ballot in Coweta County and around the region and state. Thank you to our audience. Thank you to our moderators. And most of all, thank you to our candidates, both for being here tonight, participating in this forum, and taking the step of standing up and running for office in their own communities. We greatly appreciate that, and the Chamber does as well. Of course, I'd like to thank the Chamber of Commerce and the Voice of Business Committee, employees at the Chamber, staff at the Chamber, and many citizen volunteers who helped organize this. And I'd like to thank once again Michael Britt and students in his video production class here at the Central Educational Center, and Newlink Channel 10 and the staff here for making this possible, making this setting possible, and of course videoing all of the proceedings of April 23rd and 24th. Thank you very much, and we hope to see you soon.